Okay, we're on time. We'll start. Welcome everybody to tonight's Development Control Committee meeting. Just a few housekeeping notes first before we start, then we'll get started. Fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled this evening. Therefore, if a fire alarm sounds, it's for real. Please evacuate the building as soon as you can. The exits are located behind you, the way you came through, and to either side of me behind me. We go down to reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. Hopefully we won't have to do that. The meeting tonight is being webcast live. Will be available to view later on YouTube after the meeting. And for all of us here, if we've got mobile phones, if we could please check that they're either switched off or silent to avoid any rings going off or notifications, whatever, that'd be great. Just a few words about the committee and the decisions that we're going to be making tonight. So the Development Control Committee is a quasi-judicial committee composed of councillors of all political parties and none acting in an apolitical manner. Decisions made tonight will be based on planning law, citing policies from our local plan, local neighbourhood plans from town and parish councils, or the National Planning Policy Framework. Seats in front of me and to my right are the councillors who will be making the decisions tonight. To my immediate right is our legal officer, who will be there to make sure that all our decisions are legal. And to my left are the planning officers, case officers who will be introducing the applications and planning managers, head of planning, people with planning expertise that we may or may not need to draw on as things progress. Speakers for and against will be allowed a maximum of 4 minutes, and when I call you to speak, it will be on the microphones in front of you on the right as you approach the right of the aisle. So, without further ado, we'll go to the first agenda item, which is apologies for absence and substitutions. And I had Councillor Goddison as an apology, and Councillor Basham, welcome, substituted for Councillor Howard Sorrell. Item 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Rattigan.
Chair, thank you. On item 4, Plumtree Cottage in Harrington, I'm going to remove myself from the proceedings. I'm subject to a current FOI on this application, and I think it would be appropriate for me not to be in the room. Thank you.
Duly noted. Item 3, any urgent matters to bring before the committee? Oh, sorry. Oh, Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. Just on conflicts, I don't think it is a conflict, but I just wanted to draw the committee's attention to the fact my wife is a licensed dog boarder by Basingstoke and Dean Council, and so I have a, I guess, sector knowledge with regards to the land at New Road, Pamber Green, Hampshire. I just seek your agreement that that's not a conflict.
Is there any connection between you and the particular application tonight?
None.
Okay, then you do not have a conflict of interest. Okay, thank you. Right, urgent matters.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to bring to members' attention the update paper, and in particular the housing land supply update. This follows on from an update I provided to the committee on the 10th of January committee meeting regarding the changes to the MPPF that were made on the 19th of December, and in particular the change to the 4-year housing land requirement following publication of the Reg 18 local plan. The update really sets out there's been 2 events even since the 10th of January impacting on housing land supply. One is a further guidance published by the government in the Planning Practice Guide to clarify interpretation of that 4-year housing land requirement, and the second is the appeal decision to allow development of 270 dwellings at Watermill Bridge Washwater. Dealing with the PPG first, the key part to bring members' attention to is the clarification sought, and I've said it out there in full in the 3rd paragraph, which is that the 4-year housing land supply is to be judged against a 5-year requirement, which is the way that we had interpreted it in the first instance. The reason there'd been some debate around it is that in the sector there was a suggestion that it should be measured as a 4 years of a 4-year requirement, which would have had a different implication for this council. Moving on from that, the Watermill Bridge decision had been received. That set out a number of issues around housing land supply in relation to delivery rates in particular. We are currently seeking legal advice as to the implications of that and reviewing that decision. In any case, as you will see from the remainder of the update paper, housing land supply is never moving issue because of the timings of when that is calculated, even since the Watermill Bridge decision, which suggested that there was a 4.06 housing land supply. If all of those factors were taken into account and accepted, the position in relation to housing supply has actually moved on from that in any case, because we've moved into a new calendar year in terms of how that housing supply is calculated. So if that was taken into account, we would still be above the 4 years at 4.2 years. So the main focus of this update is really to say that there's no material impact on the agenda items you're seeing this evening. In future, as things progress in terms of housing land supply, obviously future agendas will cover where we are at a particular time and what the implications are for those decisions at those future agenda items.
Okay, right. So next item 4, minutes of the last meeting held 10th of January. We can go through them for accuracy, note their accuracy. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Robinson. Seconder? Councillor Rattigan. Okay. All those happy with the accuracy of the minutes, please show. Okay, right. I shall sign them at the end of the meeting. Which brings us on to the main business of tonight, agenda item 5, planning applications. First planning item is 2203-036 full land at New Road, Pamber Green, Hampshire. And if we could have the officer introduction, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application for change of use from agricultural land to a dog walking facility. Fencing would be created around the site boundaries with parking to the front. The parking area shown on the plans is to be 30 by 25 metres. However, condition 3 requires that area to be reduced and to be agreed through that condition. In terms of an update, an amended plan was submitted to show the central landscaping, which was shown on the location plan anyway. Condition 10 has also been amended to refer to the maximum number of dogs being 5 rather than 6, which was suggested by the applicant in the report. And 2 further objections have been received, and the points not covered in the committee report have been addressed in the by the officer in the update paper, but they do not change the position of the application, which is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the update paper and agenda paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have Simon Greaves from, would you like to approach? If you want to take a seat, one of those 4 positions to your right. Yep. To your immediate right. Yep, that's fine. No, behind you, sorry. So the on-off button's to your right, and when you're ready to start speaking, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you. The right button, right-hand button.
Good evening. I am the chairman of the Pamber Parish Council. I'm here to reinforce Pamber Parish Council's objection to the application. There is no local need and it does not respect the sense of place, tranquility and remoteness of the area. If approved, it will increase traffic, pollution, as well as erode existing habitat of the wildlife in the area. Of the 154 public comments, 96 have objected, that's 62%. 95 of those objections have come from Pamber Parish residents. All of the supporting comments have come from outside the parish, and of those, 33 have been from people that live beyond Tadley and maybe between 10 and 20 miles from the area. In other words, there is no parish resident, many of them dog owners, that have voiced their support for this facility, and so there is no recorded need. So most users will be travelling far and wide, adding to the traffic on a narrow rural road and pollution to the area. Paraphrasing the local plan under heading community needs, the local plan seeks to ensure that the borough's communities and countryside are flourishing with vibrant towns and villages providing services to meet the local needs. As can be seen from the local comments, this application does not provide a local need. In addition, policy CN9 requires that developments should seek to minimise the need for travel and promote use of sustainable transport modes. It further states that developments will only be permitted if they do not result in inappropriate traffic generation or compromise highway safety. There is a very limited public transport provision in the area, and so this development clearly does result in inappropriate traffic generation from outside the parish. Of the agencies and departments the planning officer has contacted, the recommendations of Basingstoke and Dean's landscape architect seem to have been given little credence. One of the greatest impacts on the area for its residents will be the physical changes to the visual landscape, noise and increase in vehicle movements. Policy EM1 states the development will be permitted only where it can be demonstrated through an appropriate assessment that the proposals are sympathetic to the character and visual quality of the area concerning development proposals. Development proposals must respect, enhance and not be detrimental to the character or visual amenity of the landscape likely to be affected. Basingstoke and Dean landscape architects list many aspects of this application that do not meet those criteria. They also note that the site is within the impact zone of Pamber Forest SSSI. Natural England should have been asked for comments, and I cannot see that this has been done. With regard to biodiversity, there have been comments from people far more qualified and respected than me, including Paul Sterry and Kevin Chapman, but to echo their comments and concerns, the site is known nesting ground for skylarks, yellowhammers have been seen in the hedges nesting, lapwings have been seen in the area. These birds are of conservation concern document number 5, or more commonly known as the red lists. Skylarks and lapwings nest in open grassland. The RSPB say that about these birds, they cannot be conserved by means within 10 metres of a field boundary. This means that the area nesting would be left, will be further reduced by at least 10 metres from the fence or tree lines. The BBC Countryfile website states that these birds are very easily disturbed by dogs off leads, and it is vitally important that these dogs are kept under control in skylark habitat.
Could you sum up? I'm afraid we're out of time.
Okay. So finally, to recap, this facility is not needed by the local community. It will increase traffic pollution and noise in the rural area. It will not enhance but despoil the existing landscape and vistas. It will adversely affect the wildlife in the area, in particular skylarks and lapwings, which are birds.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Councillor Greaves from the councillors? I don't see any hands raised. Okay, thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Do we have a Mr. Chapman here tonight? Welcome to Development Control.
Thank you.
Once you're seated, read the mic's on already. Once you start speaking, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you very much. You switched it off. The red light needs to be on, the right-hand button. Thanks.
Good evening. Kevin Chapman from TPRP Group. That's Tadley and Pamber Rural Protection Group. We have over 300 supporters following our aims to protect the countryside from damage and to enhance the landscape, biodiversity and heritage of the area. You will have received TPRP's objections to this application, which has got 13 different elements. I don't propose to go through all those 13 elements. most of them echo what Simon has just discussed anyway. I would like to pull out two particular points. One is that because this is so damaging to the biodiversity of the area and the corridor there, it flies directly, if it was approved, it flies directly in the face of Hampshire County Council's local nature recovery strategy. In addition to that, it's been said that this ecological evaluation has been sufficient for the biodiversity officer in the council. I would challenge that and question that, because the SPD says that species evaluation should be taken from HBIC data, whereas the applicant the ecological assessor only used the MAGIC database, and therefore only highlighted species that were affected as being skylarks. Had they used the HBIC data, or the NBN data, in fact, they would have discovered far more species that were put at risk by this, and therefore that hasn't been taken into account. Most specifically, I'd raise the point about linnets, yellowhammers, grey partridge, which have been observed in that area, and there's no account taken of those. Particularly with skylarks and lapwings, skylarks which were mentioned in the ecological evaluation, it's dismissed that there's plenty of arable land around that area. Yes, there is, but skylarks are a very territorial bird, so if they lose habitat in one area, they won't move to another area. Likewise, or similarly, with lapwings, even though their habitat is slightly different, there have been lapwings identified in that area, and they're an extremely protected bird. That ground is a good nesting ground for them, and they are heavily protected. So, as I say, there are 13 different points of objection from us as a group, TPRP. Biodiversity is the main one, particularly those farmland birds, I think they're described as, grey partridge, yellowhammer, linnet.
You've got 1 minute left.
It will have an impact on other species as well, species such as hare and rabbit and badger, which will have their roaming grounds reduced. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Bound?
Good evening, Mr. Chapman. The area that's been taken out of use, or would be taken out of use by the dog walking facility,
Yep.
seems relatively little. Would you sort of accept that the areas around are likely to have the birds species that you've been speaking about, and although it probably will be detrimental,
Yes.
there are still going to be those birds in situ outside the dog walking area?
Those birds would still exist, yes. But the birds within the area would go. And a lapwing is an extremely protected bird. So to destroy its nesting ground is illegal.
Okay, do we have any further questions? Don't see any hands raised. Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Chapman. If you just switch the mic off on your right as you go, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Do we have Debbie White here speak in favour? Welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, if you press the button on your right, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Deborah and I run the company Hounds and Bounds. We offer enclosed walking fields for customers to book and enjoy with their dogs. By nature, we are a rural business and not an urban business. The drive is to enjoy the countryside, and our customers require space and the calmness the countryside provides. We have a huge amount of customers registered with us with wait times of over 2 months for some of our sessions. A large section of our customers already come from Basingstoke, Tadley and Pamber Heath, who are currently travelling to our West Berkshire sites. This led us to look at the opportunity of a field to offer to this catchment area to reduce the travel time and increase the offering within the district. The closest similar business to this site is Darling Dogs of May, although they are still a 25-minute drive away in Kingsclear. They're popular themselves and are very booked up, showing the high demand for this type of enclosure. We feel this field is in a great location because it's located just off the A340. The impact on the highway will be acceptable and will be no more than the previous Pamber Riding School on the same road. We feel there's minimal impact on neighbouring properties as there is no domestic dwellings located on the field and the nearest house is over 100 metres away. We've had objections that the field would be in a strategic gap, but I just want to highlight from the planner's report, it's confirmed that the site does not lie within a strategic gap covered by policy EM2 of the Basingstoke and Deane local plan. The development of the site will be restricted to a small area of hard standing for parking to reduce any mud travelling onto New Road. The erection of fencing with the planting of hedge and trees, in our view, improves both biodiversity of the site and landscape amenities. The ecological impact was a big focus of the comments, and quite frequently it was said wildlife could not exist with dogs present. I would challenge this because a significant amount of our wildlife is nocturnal and is actually only active when the dogs are not present on site. We note concerns from objectors for nesting lapwings. The field is presently in grass, which is not a usual lapwing nesting area, who normally look for bare ground on open, cultivated, arable land. The remainder of the field will still be left in the grass as it is now. In the summer, we mow guided paths through our grass and keep some areas of the field long. This has lots of ecological benefits of supporting the insect population, as well as working as a guide around the field without the need for hard paths. The rest of the field not included on the site will be cut for hay at least once a year. Our fences are open stock net fencing that you would find typically in farmers' fields and is not a visual block. There has been comments about the view from the footpath found at the back of the field, and the view will be of a grass open field, much like it is now. We have planned native tree and shrub planting to improve the ground and also work further as a visual block for the entrance to the field from New Road, which will be the only area that has hard standing.
You've 1 minute left.
Thank you. Furthermore, the parking area is not visible from the footpath due to the undulation of the land. At our flagship Tylehurst site, we exist very happily with the footpath through Sullen Woods down to Wilder's Folly, which are located around 7 metres away from our fence line, roughly the same as the proposed site. To sum up, we feel this field would be a great site and will cater for our customers that are currently travelling to West Berkshire to use our facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do we have any questions for Ms White? Councillor Bound.
Good evening. You've got other sites around and about. Would this site be comparable in terms of area and the amount of usage that you were saying, one visit per hour?
Yeah, absolutely. We have hour-long sessions to really minimise the changeover, and it's 1 per hour, and it's the same size as our Tylehurst site that people really enjoy.
Okay, Councillor Faulkner.
Hello, yeah. I live in the Great Pen Wood, where an awful lot of people walk dogs, and we get the professional dog walkers. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 of them with up to about 15 or 16 dogs. Now you're proposing only 1 user with 5 dogs. How would you police that?
We are on site every 24 hours and we do spot checks, so we turn up quite often early or late. We also quite often spot check the area. But we do, when people book, there's a tick box that they have to accept our terms and conditions and accept that there's 5 dogs on the area and there's a footpath nearby. So they would need to accept that as terms to rent the field.
No further questions. Councillor Basham.
Good evening. There's a charge for using the field.
Yeah.
Can I ask what the proposed charge would be? Because I just think that there's some context here around responsible dog owners and what they're prepared to invest in walking their dog in a safe environment.
Councillor Basham, I'm not sure that's relevant to the application.
Fine.
Okay. Any more questions? Councillor Court.
Good evening. I was looking at the proposed hours of use, and it says, I think, 20.45. Does that actually apply in the winter months? For instance, if animals get away, how are you going to control them?
No, in the winter months we operate, I think it's 8 a.m. till 3:45 in December and January. And we would only release out with the sunrise and sunset. So yeah, we would not be on site in darkness.
Thank you for that.
Any more questions? Thank you very much for your contribution. If you just want to switch it, that's great. Thanks. Thanks very much. Councillors, do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Page 58, condition 11, reads, whether or not development, no external lighting shall be installed within or on the application site. What does the whether or not development, no external lighting bit mean? It doesn't seem to be good English, never mind anything else. Can you explain that one? And can we tighten it up into something that actually makes sense, please?
So yeah, it's just to say whether or not it's considered development under the permitted development rights or not, but we can change that to no external lighting shall be installed within or on the application site if preferred.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed that this application is for a change of use to a dog walking facility. Could the officers advise that what status does a dog walking facility have within the planning environment where it sits? It's not agricultural anymore. It's going to a facility. Thank you.
Yeah, so it will be a sui generis use, so it won't fall under like Class E or anything like that. So there's no permitted development rights to convert it to anything else. So it will just be a dog walking facility site.
Would it be considered a brownfield site?
There's no buildings proposed. There's a small area of hard surfacing. That's. I think that answers the question. So it wouldn't be previously developed land or anything if that's what you're considering.
Councillor Freeman.
Okay. Well, the elephant in the room, I guess. What about the lapwings and the skylarks? Are we aware of them, and how does this affect the application? Because, you know, I know full well it's illegal to disturb the nesting grounds. Do we have evidence of them on site, and how will that affect this application?
So we've had an ecological assessment reviewed, which the biodiversity officer stated they're happy with. And there's also been net gain. The measures within the report for mitigation and preparation of land have been. Oh no, sorry, I thought they were covered by condition. Yeah, I mean we've had a biodiversity officer look at it. Their professional opinion is that there would be no harm. So. That's the decision we've made, and that's what we've considered in the overall balance, along with the biodiversity gains on the site.
So we can't allow any additional speaking now. Sorry. Any further? Any further questions for officers? Okay, I'll open it for debate. Who'd like to go first? Councillor Durrant.
Thank you, Chair. I have considerable concerns over the impact on existing wildlife, be they birds, deer, hare, badger, whatever. I think this area is very close in rural terms to a whole bunch of land that is being lost to solar farms and battery farms, and it is just basically corralling our wildlife and forcing them to change their roaming routes, and I don't find that the benefits outweigh those concerns. Thank you.
Are you moving or commenting? Thank you. Anyone else like Councillor Freeman?
I'd have to agree with Councillor Durant that while the basic application isn't, I don't think it's too much a problem. I'm very concerned about the impact this will have on the local wildlife, especially if we've got protected species in the area. We're supposed to be having a climate and ecological emergency. We've declared both as a council, and we really should be taking into consideration, if we have got these birds on site, we should be doing a lot more to protect them.
So are you moving or commenting?
I'm just commenting.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm more than happy to listen to the various inputs. We've had two fairly passionate inputs from the objectors based on the wildlife principles, specifically the bird life. I noticed in the report that the landscape officer has also objected to this, both initially and after further assessment. So we've got, in my mind, two very doubtful areas in the countryside that are being compromised. I grew up in the countryside, and to have a potential dog walking area in the middle of a very rural area, it's not only the area marked out in red on that view screen at the moment, but it's the impact of multiple dogs at any one time will scare the wildlife either side or in the environment of that particular area. So I'm very concerned about all those aggregating together in terms of this particular application. I'm just inputting this as part of the debate at the moment, willing to listen to other speakers.
Councillor Bound?
Thank you, Chair. I take a slightly different stance on this. I think I'm fairly happy that there is sufficient ground around for lapwings and skylarks. I appreciate that the dogs on the site will interfere with those particular birds, but there are public rights of way around and about, not too far away from that site, where people are perfectly free to walk their dogs. And it's not necessarily going to be 5 dogs on the site at one time. One person might come with 1 dog. It's just a maximum of 5 dogs. And as for lapwings, now I'm no expert on birds, but I do walk fairly frequently in Balkhurst, and there is a field there that has lots of lapwings, but it is farmed. It's interfered, and the birds are interfered with farm machinery and the like. So I'm not so much worried about the lapwings. The skylarks I can't speak to particularly. I'll have to take Mr. Chatburn's knowledge on this as being far superior to mine, but I still think that there's plenty of ground around to accommodate birds. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, Councillor Faulkner, you had your hand raised.
I think the points I was going to make have been covered.
Councillor Rattigan.
It is difficult because I think some residents think this is a Trojan horse to greater or bigger development on the site. But I walk a lot in my ward, similar to Councillor Bound, and I've always found that dog owners tend to be responsible, and certainly the ones who take the time to tick box or visit a site are probably more responsible than the ones who let their dogs run free on some of the pathways and walkways within the borough. I do not believe there is a adequate reason to refuse this as it stands. It isn't they're taking all of the land. They've confirmed that the hedging will be maintained and strengthened where it can be, and therefore nesting birds within those hedges will be protected. Now, I understand that dogs won't be on there 24 hours a day. Therefore, I believe it will have limited impact upon bird life. We haven't seen, or we didn't see the other day, evidence of lapwings bird ground nesting. There doesn't yet seems to be. And of course, with fields either side of it and to the rear of it, it looks to me as though the lapwings would move if they were in any way threatened or put upon by unlikely to be 5 dogs at one time, but I accept there might be a number. I am happy with the officer recommendation, and I'm happy to move approval.
Do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. It's just really to assist the committee before the vote on the motion. The officer assessment of the application is clear in the report, and it sets out how we've assessed the biodiversity in terms of the information in the application. Draw members' attention in particular to page 52 as to how that assessment's been formulated in relation to the ecological assessment submitted, and in particular the impact on skylarks, etc. You've heard this evening inputs from speakers who have referenced other species as well, which were not referenced in that ecological assessment. That's not to say that they are definitively there or not, but I'm just mindful that other members have, in their comments, have raised queries and concerns around that. I simply raise the point because obviously it's within the committee's gift to consider approval in accordance with the recommendation, refusal if you consider the recommendation isn't acceptable and you have reasons to do so, or deferral seeking additional information if there are concerns around, further information being required within the ecological assessment to pick up those issues that have been referenced in speaking this evening.
Thank you, Mike. Well, we have a vote proposed and seconded. I'm going to move to vote though. Those in favour, please show. So that's it. 7. Okay. Those against, please show. 4. Okay, if we can have the decision, please.
Thank you, Chair. So that application is approved as per the agenda paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next planning item, land at Upper Cufode Farm. If we could have the officer presenting introduced, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 2 is an application for reserved matters at land at Upper Cufode Farm relating to the layout, landscaping, scale and appearance for Phase 1A and Spine Road pursuant to outline planning permission at the site for the residential development of up to 350 dwellings. As I say, this application is for Phase 1A, which comprises of 48 dwellings out of the up to 350 granted at outline stage, and the Spine Road to serve the wider development. I just want to bring to your attention that the matters of access were considered in full at the outline stage, so are not for consideration as part of this application. Throughout the course of the application, there have been a series of amended plans, and these are set out, a summary of these amendments are set out on pages 70 to 72 of the main agenda. However, just to summarise, the most notable amendments relate to the increase in width of the linear green route along the Roman Road, the removal of 3-storey dwellings and their replacement with 2-storey dwellings. So just to clarify that all the dwellings proposed in this phase are 2.5 storeys or less. The incorporation of additional street trees and landscape verges, and increased depth to some of the front gardens. The initially submitted site plan and the current site plan, as in its amended form, have both been included within the visualiser for your reference. By way of update, some additional commentary from the Countryside Service has been received. As reported within the main agenda, the Countryside Service raised no objections subject to a condition, which sought additional details in relation to the method of construction of the accesses and the protection of users of the public right-of-way throughout construction. However, as set out within the main agenda, officers considered that these requirements were met through the details already agreed pursuant to condition 29 of the outline permission. And so the condition recommended by the Countryside Service was not initially included in the recommendation. However, based on the further commentary from the Countryside Service and confirmation that they have since reviewed the detail that has been agreed pursuant to the outline conditions, they've advised that it doesn't overcome the reasons for including the conditions. So as such, it's recommended that an additional condition is included, and this is set out for you on the update paper on page 8. In addition, it has been brought to the officer's attention that some of the drawings have been missed off condition 1, so it's therefore recommended that condition 1 is amended to include these drawings. Condition 2 and 4 within the recommendation seek details of materials and boundary treatments respectively. However, these details are actually already secured through conditions 8 and 9 on the outline permission, and since drafting the report, details pursuant to those conditions have now been submitted to the council and are pending consideration under a separate application. In light of that, conditions 2 and 4, as listed on page 111 of the main agenda, are no longer considered necessary, and it's recommended that they're removed. Lastly, it's just confirmed that the additional condition in relation to the public right-of-way on the update and all of the other conditions have now been agreed by the applicant, and the application is recommended for approval and is before you tonight due to the number of objections that have been received. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have any parish council representatives. We have Jill Smallman, if you'd like to approach. Welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, you press the button on your right, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, thank you very much. I'm Jill Smallman, I'm the Chair of Natural Basingstoke. We object to this proposal on the grounds that it does not conserve the biodiversity value and nature conservation interests of the site in compliance with policies ENV6 and ENV7, or comply with sections 180 and 185 of the NPPF with respect to establishing coherent and resilient ecological networks and promotion of the protection of priority species. The proposed development is in a home. The land of the proposed development is home to species protected under the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act and the Wildlife and Countryside Act, and in particular, it's home to a nationally significant meta-population of common toads. I turn to the proposed mitigation that is covered by the reserved matters. First of all, turning to the hedgerows and woodland corridor. The proposal acknowledges that there's a deficit of 570 square metres of green space in this phase, and it's unclear how this will be made up in other phases without resulting in fragmentation of the proposed mitigation features within the development. This is also incompatible with the legal obligation to consider zones of influence and provide sufficient protection for species such as hazel dormice, including a buffer zone of 10 metres from the outer edge of existing hedgerows, and to provide a protective habitat and green corridor. Ancient woodland remnants need to be preserved as part of these corridors, as it's impossible to recreate these habitats. Turning to some of the mitigations now, the Hazel Dormouse Bridge and Hopover. There's evidence from an earlier phase of the development that this has established that these are ineffective and they've ultimately fallen into disrepair. These measures do not present adequate mitigation for the fragmentation of the current habitats of this protected species. Moving on to the Toad Tunnel, which is expressly in this reserved matters proposal. The Toad Tunnel under covered lane, again, evidence on the ground indicates that this does not provide effective mitigation. Furthermore, there is lots of precedent and research into toad tunnels and their design. The tunnels, or tunnels in fact, given the length of the crossing zone and adjacent development, need to be sited at the most common crossing points and supported by effective landscaping to direct migrating toads to the access points. Collaboration will be required with the local community due to land ownership along Cufford Lane. The proposal therefore needs to be reworked to provide an evidence-based solution reflecting local knowledge of toad migration patterns before being submitted for approval. Moving on to the landscaping.
You've got 1 minute left.
Strategy. We note this proposal only relates to Phase 1A. However, as the developer is proposing to defer provision of significant green space, we believe it is appropriate to raise the overall landscaping strategy. As a minimum, predator excluding fencing for hedgerows and woodlands should be installed to provide meaningful protection. And ideally, the northern 5 hectares of Cufford Lane farmland should be designated as a nature reserve for the benefit of local wildlife. As the landscaping on the development is designated as a mixed use, this will result in potential disturbance to the species without these measures. I just conclude, the reserve matter proposal acknowledges the provision of green space in this phase is limited. Furthermore, recent evidence calls into question the proposed mitigation. The layout of this phase cannot therefore be divorced from the wider context of the development. It's not an acceptable argument to state that a lower volume of green space must be accepted in this phase and biodiversity thus compromised across the development to achieve the allocated number of homes. At this stage,
Can you sum up, please?
How they'll adequately mitigate the impact of the development on local wildlife, nor demonstrated how this might fit into the wider landscape mosaic, rather than leading to a disconnected patch of green space of limited ecological value.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions for Ms Smallman? I see any hands? Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. If you just want to press the button, switch the mic off. And do we have a Mr Cromack, if you'd like to approach? Yeah. Welcome to Development Control. When you're seated and ready, you have 4 minutes. Thank you. Oh, you need to switch the red light on. Sorry, that's it.
Can you hear me okay? It's okay, great, okay. Thank you. Good evening, Development Control Committee, council officers and audience members. My name's Scott Cromack and I'm the design manager and architect at Crowdace Homes, who are an applicant for this Reserved Matters application. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of our application. Crowdace Homes is a well-established family-run house builder who have a mission to create outstanding new neighbourhoods. We pride ourselves on designing sustainable placemaking and delivering high-quality architectural and landscape design. We have won a wide range of awards for design and quality, including 11 consecutive years of receiving the prestigious Home Builders Federation 5-Star Quality Award. Crowdace have successfully delivered developments in the locality at Sherfield Park and at Vine Park, also known as Razors Farm, which is adjacent to our site. The site benefits from an outline planning consent for residential development of up to 350 homes and includes 42 planning conditions and a number of Section 106 obligations forming part of that approval. A number of outline planning conditions have been submitted and discharged by the Council with a view to early delivery of important enhancements to habitats, biodiversity and ecology at the site. So we're trying to make an early start on that work. This phase forms part of the wider Upper Cufford Farm scheme. This application is for reserve matters approval for details such as appearance, layout, landscaping and scale for Phase 1A and the Spine Road. And as mentioned previously, the Spine Road connects both of the approved access points. Phase 1A, as we call it, proposes 48 new homes across a range of tenures, including affordable housing. A variety of open spaces form part of this proposal, which we seek to enhance and embed into our scheme, but also to embed the inherent well-established vegetation forming the boundary to the site. That includes hedgerows and tree lines to the site, to the west and to the south of the site, and to the east as well. The layout provides pedestrian focused environment and establishes I suppose, the location for the Roman road and the connection through the site that will be delivered in future phases. In terms of architectural aesthetic and character, this has really been informed by the detailed studies of the local context to inform the look and feel of the buildings and the neighbourhood we're creating. I think it should be noted that subsequent reserve matters will propose and secure the delivery of the balance of new homes on the site, the affordable housing amount, open space provision, habitat and ecological enhancements, place-based provision and the community building. This proposal has been refined, as mentioned already, through positive collaboration with the case officer and other council officers as well at Basingstoke and Dean, along with close liaison with the Hampshire County Council. Along with close liaison with Hampshire County Council Highways Department and the council acting as lead local flood authority. And also we had early engagement with the council members to essentially inform and shape this phase and the wider scheme as well. I suppose throughout this productive process we've sought to listen to the feedback we've received, and that includes reductions in heights of some key elements of the site, and this has also contributed to the Planning Department's recommendation for approval. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to the application being determined positively, and if you have any questions, I'm willing to ask them.
Excellent. And on that note, do we have any questions for Mr. Cromack? Councillor Miller.
Thank you. Mr. Cromack, good evening. You mentioned the community facility. I sort of missed it in the context you were describing it. Could you reiterate that, please? Yeah, as part of the Section 106 obligation, there's to deliver a community building that on the illustrated master plan was to the north of the site, up where there's a multi-use games area and a leap. On the layout is not located to the north of the site, to the end of the Roman road. And at what stage of the development, excuse me, Chair, if you don't mind me going on about that one, at what stage would that community facility be provided? I can't remember the specifics, but there are triggers within the Section 106 requirement for delivery of that facility against the delivery of number of homes. We would be looking to put in... Sorry. There are Section 106 obligations as part of that. There are certain trigger points as well that determine when the community facility will be delivered as part of the next stage of reserve matters submission. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Jill Swan was very concerned about the dormice and toads. Yep. Could you comment on that, please? Yeah, sure,
of course. In terms of the dormice, the outline planning conditions set out the requirements for providing the dormouse bridge and the dormouse hopover, and we have submitted and had approved details for those conditions against the outline provision. And as I mentioned in my notes, we want to make an early start on those works to have those habitats in place. In terms of the toads, that's an off-site requirement for the scheme, and the toad tunnel is proposed to the north of the site off Cufford Lane.
Come back. Yes, there was also an implication that I think it was the dormouse tunnels, whatever, they weren't being maintained on previous applications. How would they be maintained in sort of perpetuity?
I wasn't particularly clear whether that was relating to a development of ours or somebody else's development in terms of the maintenance of those tunnels. I couldn't really comment on those. We have had specialist input on our design that's been submitted and approved by the local authority for what the makeup of that tunnel is and how it functions. It's been provided by a specialist ecological advisor, and we would be looking to install it as advised.
Councillor Durrant.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted, I'm not sure I heard correctly, but this site obviously doesn't have a 40% social affordable allocation. Your intention is to make up that shortfall in the rest of the development, is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, yes. We have obligations that sit within the Section 106, and the remaining reserve matters applications will be seeking to deliver the remaining number of new homes, including affordable homes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Chair. What sort of environmental things are you building in with your houses? Things like solar panels, EV charging points, that sort of thing?
Yes, we do include those elements within our scheme. So we do provide EV charging points for every home on the development. We obviously complying with current building regulations. We have to comply with current building regulations in terms of insulation, and we adopt a fabric first approach in terms of our designs. Where we're looking to heavily insulate the buildings to building regulations requirements, and then do the, if required, the top up against that, for whether that uses PV panels or not. It may not be required in some cases because of the thermal properties of the home in the first place.
Okay, there be no further questions. Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Cromer.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Attig.
Thank you. On page 80, the landscape officer or team have continued with their objection. I just wonder if the case officer could explain, is that because it's less than substantive harm to the landscape, or is it because we've already got an outline planning permission and actually we can ignore it? So just want to get a feel for that.
So yes, page 80 details the main reasons that formulated Landscape's initial objections. In their final comments relating to the amendments, those objections were not overcome. The officer's assessment throughout the report acknowledges those comments, but for reasons, for example, if you relate it to the density of the proposed development, you need to balance that against the desire to deliver the quantum of housing as per the allocation and the outline planning permission. So it's not that we've disregarded their comments, but when you are applying the planning balance and considering all things in the round, officers are of the opinion that in this instance the proposals that are before us are acceptable.
Councillor Miller, did I see your hand raised?
You did indeed, Chair. Thank you very much. I echo the concerns about the landscaping comments by my previous speaker. I asked the question on the community centre for a very good reason. I noticed that in the written comments from Councillor Tomlin, a ward councillor, that he mentions where is the overall plan, master plan for this particular development. We're talking now about the usual problem of a piecemeal development into the bigger, wider concept of Upper Cuffle Farm, and this applies in most of our bigger developments. But particularly this one. This is next to Razor's Farm. Razor's Farm is right next door to Sherfield Park. There is one community centre in Sherfield Park. This goes again why we have these piecemeal developments at Redlands. And these will be occupied before any community centre is built on Upper Cuffield Farm. That one community centre was full 5 years ago, yet we're still building for households with no community facilities for the occupants. Now, there's something about sustainability coming in here. We have, I know, ward members have been beating this drum for a long time.
Is there a question in this?
Yes, there is, because this is about sustainability of this particular application. The other thing was mentioned about the density of this particular phase of Upper Cuffield Farm, again commented by the ward councillor. You're shaking your head, Anne, but it is relevant to the sustainability of this particular isolated application.
I'm just wondering if you can formulate a question and then the officers can respond.
The observation by the ward councillor was that it's a higher density than Razor's Farm, which is adjacent across the hedge. I pose it that to officers that this has not been considered in the assessment within this particular application before us tonight.
Oh, has this not been considered?
Thank you. I'll just break down some of what you said there. So in terms of the first point and the piecemeal approach and where is the overall master plan for the development, page 89 of the agenda does set out that the outline permission was granted subject to a condition which set out the parameters including the design and access statement and also the illustrative master plan. And the third paragraph on that page does specify that the outline planning permission therefore provided the overall master plan of the site. And then the officers consider that the reserve matters application is acceptable and in accordance with the parameters of that plan. Turning to the second point in terms of community facilities and sustainability, the legal agreement secured as part of the outline permission did require, or one of the requirements in relation to the community hall is that that is provided on site prior to the occupation of the 300th dwelling. Okay, so provided that they provide that community facility within that trigger, they'll be complying with their legal requirements in that respect. Sorry, can you just remind me what the third point was? Density. Yeah, so in relation to density, this particular phase has been calculated as resulting in a density of 28 dwellings per hectare. If you then compare that to the outline planning permission across the wider site for 390, for 300 up to 350, that is an average density of 29 dwellings per hectare across the entire site that's got outline planning permission already. With respect to the landscape officer's comments in relation to the Razor's Farm development, I think it has to be mindful what they were referring to is that the development immediately adjacent to, not the entirety of Razor's Farm in itself, which I think in total has a density of 34 dwellings per hectare when you look at Razor's Farm as a whole. So actually this parcel in density terms is less, but it's just higher than the immediate dwellings on the periphery. And I think we also have to remember that we are now dealing with a new application that will in fact create a new boundary to the countryside, and we need to look at how that transitions. And it might be appropriate that in later phases density gets less, and that is all set out in the officer's report. For the purposes of this application and this phase, the density was considered acceptable by officers.
Okay, yeah, you want to come back?
Very quick one, please, Chair. I find it difficult to relate to your use of the word the illustrative master plan or in the outline, because councillors have challenged these in the past, and we've been told it's illustrative, it can change. It's got nothing to do with the end result. I just make that comment because I'm having difficulty getting the understanding that you're using the word illustrative, therefore that proves the point. When we've tried to use it, it tends not to. But thank you very much for your explanation.
I'm not sure if you wanted to come back on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. I think that we've had a debate about illustrative master plans in the past, but I think when it's used at the outline stage, the basis of the illustrative plan is to demonstrate the capacity that's being applied for at that time, because obviously it's the number that's being secured at that time. The way that that's then taken through in terms of outline and transitioning to reserve matters is to secure a condition, which we did on that one on this occasion, to ensure that when the reserve matters comes forward, there's not a sudden drastic left turn and they're suddenly doing something which is completely out with the outline planning permission. So it's illustrative. It doesn't mean that it absolutely has to follow every single part that the illustrative plan shows, but it does need to show general conformity with that. And that's the way that the illustrative plans have been worked through.
Councillor Durrant.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question, so I'll say it first and then I'll tell you why I'm asking it. It's a sort of two-part, really. One is, does the design of these properties set a precedent for the rest of the site when it's developed in the future? And secondly, and I'm not sure this is a proper question, but I'll ask it anyway, if building regs change, i.e. from sort of insulation and solar panels and whatever, is there a provision that the future housing will be built to those new standards? That's the two questions. The reason I'm raising the first question is, as you've seen from Bramley Parish Council, their concerns, and just to state, I am a member of the Parish Council, but I have not involved myself in any of their discussions over their response to this application. Many of their concerns, and also Councillor Tomlin raises it, is over the design of the properties, lack of character, black slate roofs. They're not really in keeping with the rural setting within the parish of Bramley. So that's our concern, is will the designs be set a precedent?
Okay.
Sorry.
The design could change in the later reserve matters applications, but for the purposes of this application, the design in itself is considered acceptable and is considered to reflect the character of the area and respond to the latest development at Razors Farm. The urban design officer doesn't have any concerns with the elevational treatments or the overall design and appearance of the dwellings, and they have been amended and improved throughout the course of the application as well. In relation to building regulations, yes, absolutely. If they change, then the developer would be obligated to comply with those as they change.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. If this gets refused tonight, can you tell us what, in your opinion, probably Mike, this does to our rather fragile housing land supply?
I mean, it's already calculated in the existing housing supply requirements, and to put that into context, that the appeal that I mentioned at the beginning in the update paper, the Washwater appeal, this site was one of the contested sites where the inspector agreed that because it was making progress with the reserve matters, that there was no change to the trajectory that we'd put forward at that stage. So there is a relevance to this site progressing to maintain the existing housing land supply.
So if it were refused tonight, would that or could that be seen as a lack of progress and alter the whole picture?
It would impact on the timing of the delivery, very clearly.
Okay. Councillor Court.
In terms of the Bramley local plan, There have been a lot of comments made here in terms of compliance with the Bramley plan, particularly things like we talked about slate roofs, we've talked about height of properties, etc. So where do we stand with this report in respect of that and what's being proposed?
I think on the whole, officers consider that the proposed development in its current form is compliant with the neighbourhood plan.
Okay, there being no further questions, I shall open this up for debate. Who would like to go first? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. The principle of building this has already been decided. So there is going to be landscape harm. There is no doubt about that. There are biodiversity issues, some of which have been addressed and some of which haven't. There's landscape issues with the lack of character, the urban design, the height of the buildings. So there's an awful lot of reasons to come back and say, no, go away and rethink this. But my concern, so there is going to be harm. Any of these developments do a lot of harm, and we can't stop that. But my concern with this one is if we stop it in its tracks on tonight, because we're not happy with this and that and the other, with details, and as a result of that, we lose our 4-year housing land supply. The harm that will do to Bramley is absolutely phenomenal. And not just to Bramley, to every village around the area. So I am really, really torn on this one as which way to go, because I don't like it, but I don't like the alternative either. And I think that's all I'm going to say for now.
Okay, Councillor Durham.
Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree with Councillor Robinson. It is a difficult one. I think possibly the statement here that this doesn't set a precedent for the design on the rest of the site makes it perhaps a little bit easier, because it's a small, relatively small chunk of the overall site. So I have the same conflict that Councillor Robinson has, but that just makes it a little easier in my mind that we could move forward with it. But I'm not making a motion on that.
Okay, so we don't have anything moved or seconded. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a reserved matters application, and that's where we are. I think, yes, you can cherry pick bits and pieces that perhaps you're uncomfortable with, but looking at it as a totality, then I'm happy with it. And I would propose acceptance if that helps.
Okay, we have a mover. Do I have a seconder? Okay, I'll second then. In that case, so at least we've got a live vote on the table. Right, okay, we'll move to vote then. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Seven, okay. Those against? 1, 2, 3. Any abstentions? 1. Okay, that's decided. Can we have the decision announced, please?
Thank you. The application is approved, subject to the conditions as set out in the agenda paper and as amended through the update. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Planning application number 3, that's Lower Manor Farm. If we can have the officer, just have a little bit of a pause while people move, and then we'll have the introduction.
Thank you, Chair. This application before us now, item 3, is a full planning permission for the removal of the existing dwelling and agricultural building structures and the erection of a replacement dwelling and courtyard of ancillary buildings, including annex home office, store, stables and a 3-bay garage, with associated parking, turning, landscaping, private amenity space and access arrangement. This is the second time the application has been before the Planning Committee. It was here on the 6th of December last year, and it was deferred for more information to be received and considered on the 3 derogation tests. The update paper shows that there's been a response received from the agent on that application. It's been summarised there. The report before you in the main papers considers the change in the housing land supply, and so there is an additional reason for refusal because SS6 is now live, so that's different from your 6th of December recommendation. The report then covers the applicant's response to the 3 derogation tests, and the officer has commented after each comment and goes through, so it's like applicant, officer. And the conclusion is that the derogation tests aren't fully met. The reason why you have to consider the derogation tests is that the government give us guidance, it's from Natural England and the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and we have to consider when there is harm to protected species, whether a licence would be granted. We're not the licensing authority, so we're not overstepping our remit, but we do have to consider if a licence would be granted as part of our considering the planning application. And when Natural England grant a licence, they have to consider the 3 derogation tests, which is why we have to consider them. But obviously Natural England have a slightly different remit to us and go into it in more detail. On your printed papers, on page 130, the 3 derogation tests are there, and these are reflected in policy EM4 as well. But the first one is that a licence can't be granted. A licence can be granted for the purpose of preserving public health or public safety or other imperative reasons of overriding public interest, including those of social or economic nature and beneficial consequences of primary importance for the environment. Officers have considered those public benefits, economic benefits and environmental benefits in the report, and we don't consider that there's been any overriding justification for the loss of the 16 roosts that are in the dwelling, not the barns. The proposal is to remove the dwelling completely, and that's where the roosts are. And so, as stated, and just read the sort of summary on the 3 tests, the proposed development must meet a purpose of preserving public health or public safety or other imperative reasons of overriding public interest, including those of a social or economic nature and beneficial consequences of primary importance for the environment. In addition, the competent authority must be satisfied that A, that there is no satisfactory alternative, and B, that the action authorised will not be detrimental to the maintenance of the population of the species concerned at a favourable conservation status in their natural range. The main printed papers have gone through, and the officer has considered all the tests in public interest and has concluded in the officer's opinion that the public interest test hasn't been met, and that's resulted in the recommendation for refusal.
Okay, thank you very much. Because this is a revisiting item, there's no public participation tonight, but we can allow questions for officers if anyone has any questions. Councillor Robinson.
Obvious question, I think, which is to me anyway. What exactly is this licence? What are we licensing? I sat on licensing and I haven't come across this one. It's a licence to do what, or could you explain that?
Yeah. A licence, just find it on here, it's a licence from Natural England, and its official name is to, where you have, the official name, we just call it a derogation, an EA licence. The regulation prohibitions, Yeah, it says Natural England is the licensing authority for the purpose of this licensing regime. So we are not giving it a license, but we have to consider when we're giving planning permission if it's likely to get a license. There is a little bit in here, if you just let me read it out, because this is Natural England's guidance. Planning and licensing are separate and distinct consent regimes. Much of the information and evidence required by Natural England in order to determine a licence application will also be required by the planning authority as the competent authority for planning in its consideration of the planning merits of the application and, if necessary, the likelihood of the development activity being granted a licence. The high level of advice provided by Natural England at the planning stage, however, does not indicate that it has made a full assessment of the scheme against the licensing tests. So basically we have a duty to consider if a licence is likely to be granted, but we don't grant the licence, and if we were to grant planning permission, doesn't mean to say that they would get a licence either. That's what that's saying. So they're two separate regimes, but we have to consider if it's likely that they would get one. And in this instance, because there is the complete loss, there's no avoidance of harm, because the first step is avoid, and if you can't avoid, mitigate and compensate, but that's a last resort. The first test, as in EM4, is to avoid harm. And the harm comes from the demolition of the building, which has the roosts, the dwelling, not the buildings, not the agricultural buildings. The roosts are in the dwelling.
You've told me everything except what I want to know, to be honest. Which is, you told me how the licence works and worked out, but you haven't told me what the licence itself does. You told me who issues it, and that you've got to consider whether it will be issued. But is it if I've got a licence, it allows me to drive a car. A licence might allow me to open a pub. What does this licence allow? Is it a licence to move the bats? Is it a licence to knock the property down? What is this licence allowing?
Okay. Basically, it's an offence to do criminal offence, and I can read it here, to deliberately kill, injure, disturb, capture, damage, destroy, possess, control or transport. And it's also an offence to disturb and obstruct. So because of that criminal activity, if you want to do work that would potentially result in that, you have to demonstrate that you are competent to do it, and then you have to go to Natural England and justify why you want to do that activity that if you don't get a licence would be a criminal offence. So it means that you can do your building work within the realms of the law, because if there are protected species and you just crack on and don't get your licence, you're breaking the law. And if you do get your licence, which will have fully considered the protected species on the site and what you need to do, whether it's reasonable or necessary, but it is separate completely to the planning legislation.
So, in effect, this time it is a licence to interfere with the habitat of these bats.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. That's where I wanted to end up.
Okay, so there we have it. The crux of this application is, do we have confidence that that licence be granted? Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it was guidance from Natural England and obviously national government. Would not this have been easier for us as the planning authority had they gone to Natural England and said, can I have a licence on the basis that there is mitigation, we can move bats because they are movable objects, and not rather than us make the decision which they could get a licence or not get a licence. If we approve it, they've still got to get a licence to move it. So I wonder if it should have been licence first, planning permission second in some way. And the public interest is very difficult to pin down. You know, the public interest in having ugly buildings is not great either. So you know, there is maybe a benefit. Is there not a way in which we can, I hate to say, defer again, and then they go for the license, and then if they don't get it, then we can review it on that basis or kick it out on that basis?
Thank you, Councillor. I don't think there's any further point of deferral. You've already committee's already deferred the application once for additional information. I think in the normal course of events, the licence would follow if there was a grant of planning permission, but to bring it back to the considerations for the committee this evening, it is on the planning application, not, despite obviously how we've got to consider it, it's not the actual licensing itself. So the key issues here is that it needs to be an overriding public interest to grant it. And I think in particular the report sets out the point around the fact that there are it's not been demonstrated there aren't alternatives to this, which is simply not to knock the building down. There isn't a requirement to do that. And as per the introduction, planning policies, bringing it back to those in terms of policy EM4 and those in the MPPF, do seek to avoid the impact on protected species, which the applicant's own consultant has been very clear. There are protected species in that building, so it's not one where we have suspicions of. There actually has been ecological information provided to say there are protected species in that building.
Yep.
And thank you, Mike, for that explanation. So what you're saying is that if they maintain the building that's there, the old house, knocked everything else down, they could have a house somewhere else on that site, and that would be much more acceptable. Is that what you're indicating? Because I'm trying to help the applicant here in finding a way forward.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you've got to consider the planning application before you, and not consider alternatives beyond that. So,
Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to understand a bit more about reason 1 for refusal, around the formation of a new dwelling. We talk about this being a formation of a new dwelling within the countryside, and then it says the proposed development would not amount to a replacement dwelling, and then on page 136, planning balance conclusion, we say the principle of replacement dwellings in the countryside is allowed for within our development plan. However, in this instance, the application does not accord with the detailed character therein because the scheme is for a new dwelling rather than a replacement dwelling, by virtue of the building being sited outside of the original dwelling's curtilage. So can I just understand a bit more about how you've defined curtilage on this site, and how that works in the context of basically a new dwelling on a single site, and the interaction between what you're considering to be, I guess, brownfield and or curtilage, which would include the garden, the domestic garden, and the basically the moving of the property on the site. Thank you.
If you look at this plan, this is probably the best one to describe it. The red line is the application site, and within that red line you have the dwelling proposed to be demolished, which is just there, that building. So that building, because it's a dwelling, it has a curtilage. There's no legal definition of a curtilage, but it's the naturally associated around the building. And with this one, you've got boundaries, so it would be the back of the building. So you'd say that was the residential part of the red line. The rest of the site, the big barns and things to be demolished, aren't residential, they're agricultural. So it's material in planning terms. There's a change of use from agricultural to dwelling if the application were to be approved. The replacement dwelling, so you'll see it's a replacement dwelling within the red line of the application, but the policy on replacement dwellings in the local plan said that they have to be within the plot that's residential. So that would be within the small top left-hand corner of that drawing. So if they would take away the bat issue, if they were to knock down the existing dwelling and propose a replacement dwelling within the same residential curtilage plot, then it would be policy compliant in principle, subject to the design and the impact and everything else. But because this one includes the change of use of agricultural land to become residential, for planning policy purposes, it doesn't meet the test of a replacement dwelling because it's making the plot much larger and involves the change of use of agricultural land to residential.
Thank you for that explanation. Do you have a steer on how, putting aside the fact that the building moves outside of the existing curtilage, or your considered view of what the curtilage means in the absence of a legal definition. Can you give me an indication of what you think the increase, roughly, of the curtilage of the proposal is compared to the existing?
I have, the officer hasn't done the percentage, but looking at that, it's probably about an eighth of it. So it's eightfold increase, maybe. I don't know that. So, but you can see it there on the plan, because although there's no legal definition of curtilage, as in it's X square metres per square metre of building, there is a lot of legal tests that have created tests to do it. So relationship to the building. So it's those agricultural buildings are agricultural, even though they're close to a dwelling. Yeah.
So you say an eightfold increase. So are you suggesting then that the proposed site plan is to change all of this to residential? Is that what's happening here?
Yeah. The proposal is involved residential because the dwelling is proposed to go sort of on a line where that lower manor farm wording is. So you can see it there. You can see that the proposed dwelling to be demolished is in the top left-hand corner. So there's no overlap of the new dwelling and the existing dwelling. It just becomes garden.
Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, a question to officers, if I may. Should we take into account, as we know, last week the appeal inspector overturned our officer's refusal. 3 miles up the road at Wash Common, he approved the demolition of Common Farm, which is a sizable farmhouse, a lot of barns and a lot of outbuildings. So they're all going to be demolished and replaced with 270 dwellings. And therefore the effect on the biodiversity, etc., is considerable. Does that have any influence on this one dwelling here?
No, it's not. The only influence has been covered in the urgent item at the front of the agenda on the impact of that decision on housing land supply figures. But as an individual application, it has no impact on this application.
Okay, I think we're in a position now to move to vote on this one. It seems pretty clear to me that the tests have not been met, that there is no demonstrable benefit, but there's massive harm from the loss of 16 pipistrelle bat sites, and that any work that would commence without a licence would be illegal. So on that basis, I'm going to move the recommendation from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Freeman, 3 seconders. Councillor Freeman, for the record. And we're now moved to vote. So those in favour of refusal, please show. Okay, 10. Any against? Any abstentions? 1. Okay, that item is carried. If we could have the decision announced, please.
The application is refused as per the printed papers and the slight alteration in the update paper.
Chair, further to my comment earlier, I'm going to excuse myself now.
Okay, next item. Yeah, noted. You'll remove yourself from the chamber. So, application number 4, which is Plumtree Cottage, Summerdown Lane, Hannington. If we could have the officer introduction, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a householder planning application for the erection of a 2-storey rear extension on Plumtree Cottage, which is a notable building within the Hannington Conservation Area. The proposed extension scale, form, mass and bulk, as well as the removal of the cat side element, would cause less than substantial harm, in the officer's view, cause less than substantial harm to the notable building within a conservation area where there is no public benefit to outweigh this harm as required by paragraph 208 of the NPPF. As such, the application is recommended for refusal on those grounds. Thank you.
Okay, do we have Mr. Cox from the Parish Town Council? Has he gone? Oh, that's the wrong one. Beg your pardon. Right. Apologies, everyone. Do we have Mr. Runcie to speak in support, please? Welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, press the button on your right and you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. The building is a detached two-storey cottage built approximately 1840. There's a rectangular plan set centrally on the plot with a parking area to the side of the house and a generous garden to the rear. Views are afforded from the highway to the fields beyond. The building is of a traditional structure with a pitched roof clad in slate. To the rear is a single-storey extension with a cat slide asymmetric roof over. Although of a simple form, the building is characterful and makes a strong contribution to the local conservation in which it lies. The two chimneys define the original building profile. An interest is created by the wavy front wall, structural ties, brick detailing, Flemish blonde brickwork and flint panels. The only element of the building which detracts the white PVC windows is installed by a previous owner, which, if approved today, will be replaced. Unfortunately, under the former owner, the property has become dilapidated to such an extent that it was only able to be sold at auction, and no banks were able to offer a mortgage due to the condition. For the building to be suitable for a family, sorry, I pressed the wrong button, family living, alongside modernisation, additional space is required. The proposal is to add a two-storey extension to the rear to create a new kitchen dining space with a bedroom above. Internally, there will be minor alterations, but the majority of the walls remain unchanged. The proposed extension is set back from the building line with the ridge lower than the existing, so that the addition will appear subservient to the host, complying with the council policy and guidance within the supplementary planning document. At ground level, the addition will project 4.95 metres from the face of the building, with the extension above the existing single-storey section, replacing the cat slide roof. Following the viewing panel, and at the request of the case officer, we have provided an updated elevation which shows the profile of the cat slide asymmetric roof imposed over the extension. The drawing shows how minimal the change in profile will be, and also it should be noted that the cat slide is a relatively modern addition, post-1945, with modern timbers, and accepted by the conservation officer that it has no historic importance. When considering options for the extension, we're mindful of the setting of the building and chose not to extend to the sides. By extending above the existing and to the rear, the gaps between the building and the boundary are retained, permitting views from the road to the fields beyond, and from the public right-of-way back towards the village. This is an exception when viewed in relation to the two neighbouring properties, which have both been significantly extended and fill the full widths of their plots. We still believe it's correct not to extend to the side of this building and and maintain those gaps and not to disrupt the views. As pointed out in the viewing panel, the extension to the rear cannot be seen from the front of the property, and therefore it's unreasonable to state there will be a detrimental effect to the listed buildings that lie on the opposite side of the road. In summary, the extension accords with the council's supplementary guidance and therefore is purely down to a subjective matter of design. We believe the cat slide offers no architectural merit nor historic importance, and we believe the design is sympathetic and appropriate to the plot and setting within the conservation area. Proposals will transform the dilapidated cottage into a home suitable for modern family living without having any adverse effect on neighbouring properties or landscape views. We hope that you can support us in making your decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Mr. Runcie? Don't see any hands up. Thank you very much for your contribution. Councillors, do we have any questions for officers? I see no hands raised. Okay, we shall move on to debate. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. These old cottages, if they're not up to a standard where a family can live in them, they become completely unsustainable. And from what I've just heard, that's what's happened here. Somebody's, not maintained it. And it needs to be brought up to standards so you can get a family who'll live there, spend money on it and maintain it. That way we save older buildings, because if they haven't got a viable use, they're going to fall down. But I was told years ago that extensions to houses like this need to be in keeping with, but identifiable from the original structure. And that seems to make sense to me. And what the applicant's done with this, they want to put an extension up which is away from the road. It's set back from the front elevation, and the loss of this cat slide roof, which is actually very small, is completely and utterly invisible to anybody going in past this property. It's right round the back. So I think it does actually, it's the extension itself, it doesn't detract from the building, it is in keeping with the building. But because it's set back and the roof is set back, you can say, there's the original building, that's the modern extension. And in extending it, I think it does preserve the building for the future. So I'm actually happy to move it for approval. Thank you.
Okay, we've got a move for approval. Councillor Faulkner, do you want to contribute?
I was basically going to agree with what the councillor said.
I
would add one thing is that I thought one of the main objections was what you could see from the road, but because what you see from the road is the end, you can't see, I don't believe, the extension, and it's dwarfed by the neighbouring properties. So I'm happy to second the motion.
Okay. Councillor Bound, I'll invite you to speak, and then we'll go back to you, Councillor Robinson, for reasons for approval.
Thank you, Chair. This is actually in my ward, so I go up there fairly frequently. I would totally disagree with the fact that the extension will not be able to be seen from the road. If you look from the sort of what would it be, the north south, from the south, the side of this building is going to be conspicuous. You can see it from the north, looking along the side of the building, and I checked this morning because I was up there, just to make sure that I'm right in my assumptions about what you could see, and it's going to be extremely visible from the public right of way at the back. And when I was up there, when we were up there on the viewing panel, there were people walking around the back. So the cat slide roof, which seems to have, because it was only in the 19th century, people seem to be assuming that it's not an important part of what is there at the present time. I mean, the conservation officer doesn't say that the building would not take some sort of improvement. But I don't think in this case that it does take that does make that improvement. So I will be voting against it.
Councillor Robinson, do you have reasons for approval?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to set the record straight first, I didn't say that the extension couldn't be seen from the road. I agree with Councillor Bound. It can be seen from the road. As you look into that site at about 45 degrees, you will see the extension. What you won't see is where the cat slide roof was. Reasons for approval, I believe it does preserve and enhance the building and the conservation area. Thank you.
Okay, so you're basically turning the reasons round for refusal on their head. It does comply with the M11 and the M10 and section 16 of the MPPF. Okay. Right, we'll go for the vote then. Those in favour of approval, please show. Eight. Okay. Those against? 1. Abstentions? 1. Okay, that's decided. If we could have the decision announced, please. Oh, we'll do conditions as well.
Yeah, so conditions suggested would be approval of the plans, development to be carried out within 3 years. Notwithstanding the information shown on the submitted drawings, no relevant work shall commence on site until materials and finishes have been submitted to. There's quite a specific list here which include the form, a sample panel, the material, colour, finish, size and source of facing bricks. Combined with the above, the material, colour, finish, profile and source of joining mortar, the material, size, texture, colour, profile and source of cladding materials, and for roofing materials, and detailing of valleys, hips, ridges, gables, parapets, eaves, verges and proposed rainwater goods. In addition to that, we've got, notwithstanding the submitted information, no relevant work shall commence on site until full working details of all windows and external doors are approved. We've also got permitted development rights for Class A, AA, B, C and D of Part 1, Schedule 2 of the permitted development order to be removed. And the final condition suggested is that the ensuite bathroom and bedroom windows at first floor level on the north and south elevations of the proposed dwelling are glazed with obscure glass.
Okay, thank you for that. Are we content with those conditions? I see nods. So if we could just have the decision, that's...
Thank you. So the application is approved as it is considered it would preserve the heritage asset being the notable building within the conservation area in accordance with policy EM11 and EM10C of the Basingstoke and Dean Local Plan and Heritage SPD, and the conditions just stipulated. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Which brings us on to planning item number 5. Land at Hounsome Fields. If we could have the officer to introduce, please.
This is a full planning application for the development, construction of 2 number gypsy and traveller pitches, including a new shared vehicular access, each pitch served by an amenity building, space for stationing of a mobile home and space for a touring caravan. In addition, parking and landscaping and engineering and associated works. There is a small update on page 14 of your update papers. Just to confirm that an email has been received that the prior commencement conditions suggested have been agreed. As I say, it's a resubmission, revised of submission from one that was refused in May 2023, which has gone to appeal, but we have no start date or no information on that. It was in the, we said we'd update you if we'd had a start date, so. And the only update is the full comments from Councillor Taylor, who was unable to make this evening's meeting. And then the only update is a topographical error in condition 17. So condition 17 has been duplicated in full.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have Julian Jones here? Welcome to DC, Julian. When you're seated on the right, press the button on the right. You'll have 4 minutes.
Okay, thanks for letting me speak tonight. This site, which is approximately 4.5 miles from the town centre, is remote from facilities and will be a long way from the dentist and the surgery, which has had a very troubled history on Beggarwood. When the school is built, it'll take 5 years before all the classes are filled, and therefore in those years, if this is developed, those children will have to be bused from this location. There's no current public transport within a mile of the proposed site, except for the 3 buses on Monday, Wednesday and Friday that go through. This proposal does not comply with Basingstoke's local plan policies. When the site was granted outline planning permission in, I think, 2017, a member of your committee required the inclusion of the travellers' pitch. The applicant objected strongly to this requirement at the time and has done very little since to accommodate the requirement in a way that conforms to the policy, which encourages integration with the settled community. Unfortunately, changes to the borough's planning officers has allowed this requirement to be overlooked as subsequent detailed plans have emerged. The result is an application you see before you with a negligible chance from the plans. You have a negligible difference from the plans you've refused in the past. Planning policy for the travellers' sites, the PPTS, Part D, advises enclosing that not enclosing the site with high fences that will give the impression that the site is and its occupants are deliberately isolated from the rest of the community. CN5G, the potential for successful integration between the travelling and settled communities is an important part of the borough's policies. By the way, the landscape impact section on page 204, the paragraph still appears to refer to a 1.8 metre fence, so for the avoidance of any confusion, that should be 1.6. And also condition 6 on page 203 talks about levelling the site, but that, in fact, condition 6 is about the gate. And indeed, the site, I think, varies by more than a metre from north to south, which will mean that the height of this fence will actually be perceived as considerably more than the 1.6 metres, and there's no retaining wall shown on the plans to support that levelling. Will the site come under the management committee for Hounston Fields, or the management company?
1 minute remaining.
Yep. Or will this be yet another way in which the community are isolated from the main development? Trenchard's Lane's narrowed and comes to the north. There's a very sharp bend with poor sight lines. In the morning peak hours, there's a great deal of traffic using this route as a rat run, and that'll get worse as more development comes in Oakley. It will not be safe for children, and those who were on the viewing committee last year will remember that we moved out of the road because it was perceived as so dangerous and retired to the drive of Southwood Farm. So I urge you to again refuse this application. It's not good.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Councillor Jones? I see no hands raised. Thank you very much for your contribution. And if we have Mr. Napier and Mrs. Gill. Mrs. Gill first. Well, you've got 4 minutes between the two of you. So you might as well sit together. Okay, so how I'll do this, you've got 4 minutes between the two of you. When I get to 2 minutes, I'll let you know. Okay, when you're ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Melanie Gill, and I live in the Southwood community area. The application is essentially the same as the previous one, which was refused at the DCC meeting in May as it did not meet policy CN5G and parts of PPTS. I quote, "The proposed development would not successfully integrate the traveller community with the settled community, and that the plan, quote, turns its back on the emerging new community development. The developer has consistently refused to integrate the site, despite having 92 acres and several years to comply. But the nearby golf course development has integrated their traveller site, so it can be done. The application still shows a dangerous entrance with poor sight lines onto Trenchard's Lane, a narrow rural lane used as a rat run to and from Oakley. It is part of the popular Wayfarers Walk and close to the entrance to Southwood Farm. The traveller site would dominate the rural nature of the long-established Southwood community, contrary to PPTS. There would never be a standalone traveller site in this location. The traveller site belongs to Hounston Fields and should be integrated by turning the entrance from Trenchard's Lane to using internal roads and new roundabout of the development. Having its own entrance is definitely not integration, but segregation. The only changes to the previous application are a 140-metre long isolated footpath to the rear of the site and a slight reduction of 20 centimetres to the surrounding fence. Do these features now set a precedent as Basingstoke's gold standard for full integration of traveller sites into new developments? If so, it will be seen by local developers as an easy, no-cost option. Please refuse the application. Thank you.
I am Stafford Napier. I'm also speaking on behalf of Robert Bowden of Southwood Farm, the historic listed farmhouse near the site. I've followed the history of the Hounsdon Fields allocation since 2013 and have pointed out on multiple occasions to multiple officers over the years the danger that the developer would obtain approval for all reserved matters and then claim he has no option but to locate the gypsy pitches where they cannot conform with the requirements of the local plan policy. We're now left with pitches being dumped adjacent to existing residents of Ganderdown and Southwood, contrary to national policy on the provision of sites in rural locations. Someone more cynical than me might consider that the planning process has been manipulated to ensure the required pitches are as separated as possible from the housing. The statement by the applicant that the proposed development fully addresses the reasons for refusal is patently nonsense. The provision of a long, narrow footpath and a minuscule lowering of the surrounding solid fence, with the only access being solely onto Trenchard's Lane for vehicles, goes nowhere to address the reasons for refusal. This application should again be refused, and the applicant should be encouraged to find a way to access his gypsy pitches entirely from within Hounsdon Fields. It cannot be impossible to provide a single road access across the oil pipeline that would serve both the allotments and the large area of land that these gypsy pitches will occupy.
Thank you very much, both of you. If you just switch the mic off, that's great. Do we have any questions for either Mrs. Gill or Mr. Napier? Okay, thank you both very much for your contributions. And do we have Lewis Brewer speaking in support, if you'd like to approach? And when you're ready, press the button on the right. You have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Lewis Brewer from Boyd Planning, acting on behalf of Vistry for this application. I firstly want to thank all officers for their work throughout this application and efforts to achieve today's agenda. We note that through speaking with the planning officer and consultees, there are no statutory objections to the application, and we welcome the officer's recommendation for approval. This application is compliant with all planning policy, in particular policy SS 3.12, which relates specifically to Hounsdon Fields, and policy CM5 relating to gypsy and traveller pitches. It is, however, in our view that the criteria in policy CM5 does not apply to this application, as the policy clearly states that the criteria applies to all proposals other than those set out in policy SS 3.9 to SS 3.12. Nonetheless, the proposal is compliant with all policy CM5 criteria. The committee will be aware that outline planning permission was granted in 2017 for a new community at Hounsdon Fields, which included a requirement for gypsy and traveller pitches in accordance with policy SS 3.12. The location of the pitches off Trenchard Lane was approved when the phasing plan, which was required by the section 106, was approved by the council on the 22nd of October 2022. The committee will recall that a similar application for gypsy and traveller pitches was refused last year against officers' recommendation and is currently subject to an appeal. The principal reason for refusal was a lack of integration between the traveller community and the settled community. This application has addressed this by providing a footpath link into the settled community and reducing the height of the boundary fence to reduce its sense of enclosure whilst maintaining a safe and secure environment for the traveller community. If the committee are minded to approve the revised application, the appeal will be withdrawn. The footpath will allow direct connection to House and Fields and the services and facilities that will be delivered there. The footpath will mean that the pitches are no further away from the neighbourhood centre than some of the new homes to the south of House and Fields. All technical matters have been addressed, such there are no statutory objections. This includes Hampshire County Council's confirmation that the proposed access is acceptable in highway terms. Vistry are well advanced in delivering homes at House and Fields and are required by the Section 106 to provide the G&T pitches by the 450th occupation. Vistry are therefore keen to gain approval for the pitches to avoid delay in the delivery of well-needed homes, which is essential to improving the Council's housing land supply position. We therefore hope the committee can support the positive recommendation of officers and grant planning permission for this policy-compliant application for much-needed gypsy and traveller pitches. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr Brewer? Councillor Freeman?
Thank you. Can you tell me what the thinking is behind enclosing the gypsy and traveller pitches with a huge fence? Surely it would be more integrating to the community to dispense with the fence entirely. So what's the thinking behind the fence?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the fence is mainly for security and safety for the occupants of those pitches. To point out that the 1.6 metre high fence is lower than your average garden fence. I'll leave that there.
Can we just listen to the answer, please?
Yeah, so as I was saying, it was based on privacy and safety.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown?
Good evening. So it's your contention that this footpath will integrate this establishment, this new gypsy site, with the rest of the Houghton Field, in spite of the fact that the people will have to drive all the way around to access any facilities?
Yeah, so in terms of access, it was sort of touched upon that road access cannot be provided due to the gas pipe. So this footpath has been put in, and as I stated, it's the same distance from the southern plots in the site to the community. It will be the same distance. They have also access to the same open spaces within the same distance as the rest of the community.
Yes.
I haven't seen any map which shows me where this gas pipe is. Is it possible to indicate it?
Okay. Councillor Robinson?
I've got two questions, if I may, Chair. First question is, why have you taken the footpath on the longest route you possibly could from the north corner of the site and not the short route from the east corner of the site? And secondly, you say you can't get a road access across the gas pipe, but the gas pipe manages to cross Trenchards Lane, the A30 and the M3, which strikes me as a bit odd that you can't put travellers across it. If you could explain those to me, I'd be very grateful.
In terms of the gas pipe, I think they're sort of more technical matters that may be sort of above my explanation. And in terms of the footpath, I think that backed along by the landscaping and avoided allotments.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Questions for officers? Councillor Rattigan?
Can you confirm where we are on our provision of gypsy and traveller pitches at the current time? Is there a shortfall? The local plan indicated the 4 in Headley, and that obviously is not going to come forward. Can you just give us an update on that?
I don't know the position for the borough because this wasn't a need application. It was part of an allocation application and has come forward to fulfil the allocation requirement, although it's a full and not a reserve matters. And the section 106 links it to the outline application. So there wasn't a requirement to do an evaluation of gypsy and traveller housing need for the application.
If we do not move this forward, can you just confirm that there will be a delay after the 450 have been built, and that will affect our 5-year housing land supply or 4-year housing land supply? Is that to be accepted?
I mean, as things stand, that would be the case because the 106 says that you can't occupy more than 450. Obviously, it's not for us to speculate on what would happen next, but it could be that, or it could be that a further application for variation of that agreement is therefore submitted if it's not been possible to secure planning permission, ultimately pursuant to the allocation and an outline permission for the gypsy and traveller provision.
Councillor Basham.
It's a question for Mike. Once they go past the 450, how many more houses does that unlock?
Sorry, so the total outline planning permission was for 750.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Councillor Rattigan's already asked the question.
Councillor Miller.
What do officers consider integration and the fact that this footpath and reduction of height of the fence was that the tipping point for them to decide that this was acceptable compared to the refused application? Because it's obvious that integration is at the crux of all this.
Yeah, the officer who's drafted the report has fully considered the 2 changes in the scheme in relation, but not in isolation, in relation to the approved layout for the rest of the field. It's not, although it's an empty field at the moment, the officer in drafting the report has considered the material consideration of the extant permissions that are being built out on Hanson Fields. And it's close and relating to that. The character of that area is changing. It's going to be part of a housing, coming down a housing scheme and surrounded by the allotments. So the officer who's drafted it has considered those 2 changes and considers that on the basis of the application that it is integrating into the scheme.
So Councillor Dunn first.
Thank you, Chair. Could the officers just highlight on that map which bit of the development would be delayed if this were refused? Is that possible? Thank you.
I can't tell you which one it is, but from my knowledge of it being built out, it's being built out from Kennel Farm downwards and down towards the roundabout. The county have just granted permission for the school. So this is the final phase. Yeah, that's the final phase. You've got to assume that they're building down, and that's the thing. But they might choose to build up, but that's the last final phase that got approval. So they do appear to be building down.
If I may, does that mean that if it progresses the way it is, that it's the development adjacent to the pitches and the allotments, are they, that is not yet built out?
No, they're not yet built out, and there's a current planning application on page 196, if you look at, which is a variation of condition 1 which is the plans of application 21-01482 RES. So that's a pending consideration. So they currently have planning permission to build it out, and that is freestanding and independent, but they've come in with a request to amend that scheme. But if that's approved or refused, they still have their first permission to fall back on, so they do have an extant approval for the build out. But to say that there is one pending, just to say that's changing but not yet been considered.
Okay, we're on second question for Councillor Basham. Oh, Councillor Freeman, if you've not asked one yet, have you? You go first.
So just a quick one, and can I apologise for my previous talking while the chap was, I didn't mean to say that out loud. My question is, how much consultation have we done with the actual Gypsy and Traveller communities to find out what they want from these pictures? Because surely, to my mind, that would be the first place to start to actually ask these travellers what they want and what they would prefer, or are we just designing with what we think they want? Because, you know, if they've got to live there, surely they should have some kind of say in the matter?
There's no requirement for an end user, so there's not a named person to come in. The policy requires us to provide the space. The space is, and the amount of space is required is in the government document for planning for travellers. The site allows for 2 pitches with a building for each pitch, space for a larger mobile home, which is technically still a caravan under the planning laws, and then space for a tourer to come in as well. So it meets, there's no end user who has a specific need or requirement. It's the equivalent of building houses for the settled population to come in and buy, but it has the provisions that the government advice on Gypsy and Traveller sites say are required for these properties.
Councillor Hussey.
Following on from that last point, I thought there was a representative body for Gypsy travellers. Well, have we not consulted them?
I've just been informed that we don't consult them on individual applications.
Councillor Bound. Councillor Bound.
Sorry, Chair, no, it's just because effectively it's a single application. The decision as to whether Gypsy and Traveller pitches should be provided on this site as a whole has already been taken through the allocation of the site in the local plan with the requirement in, and then the outline planning application and permission securing that. Yeah, of course.
In view of the fact that an application has been refused and gone to appeal, doesn't that create an exceptional situation where we should seek about the principle of this site not being integrated within the community but on the edge of the community, and get a view of the people who represent? We're trying to second guess Gypsy and Traveller requirements, are we?
I understand the point being raised, Councillor Hussey, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that those decisions in planning terms have already been made in terms of the securing it at the outline stage. As Patricia's already mentioned, ultimately it'd be provided for, no different to the settled community, and then there'd be an option for people to buy should they, or occupy should they choose to.
Right, Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. So bearing in mind that it appears that the objectors were quite happy for integration to occur, what's the significance of this gas pipeline seems to be paramount in there not being a road link through to Hounslow Fields, or at least a footpath taking a different direction, picking up on what Councillor Robinson said, and it taking the longest route round. So how important is this gas pipeline?
Thank you, Councillor Bound. I think it's just simply the case that you've got the application to consider before you. The applicant has offered an explanation as to how they've gone about designing this and why they've not considered other options. The application has ended, if you like, in terms of being what's been proposed. So it's not before the committee to consider alternatives at this stage. In terms of the technical aspects of whether you can or can't, we don't have that information before us.
It was rather a question, Mike, in terms of were you consulted about the gas pipeline in terms of them routing this path up round the allotments? Did it come under your sort of remit to advise them, or did they just assume that they can't go over a pipeline?
I'm not aware of anything that the local planning authority has set out to say that they can't do it that way. I think it's just simply that the application has been put forward in the applicant's view to address the reason for refusal that was put forward previously, and the officer assessment sets out, taking that into account as a material consideration as a sort of planning history of the site, why officers consider that does address the reason for refusal.
Right, Councillor Robinson, you had a question.
Thank you. It's been answered by somebody else.
Okay, Councillor Basham, and then I'll draw questions to a close.
Thank you, Chair. I thought you'd forgotten me. I just wanted a point of clarification from officers, really. I think it's Councillor Taylor's comments provided in advance talk about policy CN5 and how the integration of this site is in contravention of that. I'm struggling to find that looking at policy CN5 on the internet. Can officers just please clarify the reasons for objection last time around the improper integration of this site? Was that driven by policy CN5 or was that driven by the PPTS? Thank you.
Can I just clarify your question? Are you the reasons for the previous application was refused are on page 187, and then you were making reference to Councillor Taylor's. Is that Councillor Taylor's comments in the update paper that she produced because she couldn't speak?
Yes, that's correct. So the proposed development would not successfully integrate the travel community with the settled community. This proposal turns its back on the emerging new community development. Is that a reason for refusal driven by PPTS or by CN5?
I wasn't on the at the meeting for that, but that was drafted following the members' consideration of the application. So I would imagine that the members had looked at CN5. It's quite specific on D and G, which are D is there is safe and reasonable access to the highway, public transport services and sustainable transport options, and G was the potential for successful integration between travelling and settled community has been demonstrated. So, so I wasn't at the previous meeting, but from reading that, I would say that's what's driven the members to draft that reason for refusal.
Thank you.
Okay, we shall now move on to debate. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to lay out where I am on Gypsy and Traveller pitches and where they should be in the borough. Firstly, putting them on large sites doesn't help the settled community. It doesn't obviously help the new community who feel that that's something they don't want and would like further away from them. And in my discussions with the traveller community, as I'm one of their Mackenzie friends in other boroughs, they don't like them either. And let's just be blunt. The local plan might well have suggested that we move forward with sites within our large sites. I genuinely think it's an awful policy, and we ought to be looking at individual sites just for travellers and find the right areas for them. This has come before us because it is difficult for everybody, and the reality is that these two pitches are it could never be put anywhere within that huge new conurbation without affecting somebody. But in my view, as is stated, there are reasons for approval. And let's just be honest, any traveller movements onto the road will be minimal. It's two pitches. It's not 10 or 12. It is likely to be two families who are related and likely to go out at times together. I think it is, in all good grace, we have failed the Gypsy and Traveller community. We have not delivered what we should have delivered in the local plan as stated in 2016. We haven't delivered the 5 Manny down, and it's hardly surprising that it is difficult for us to do it. But in my view, we all who were here in 2016 signed up to that local plan. We approved it without contention. It was approved by the inspector as an adequate way of providing for Gypsy and Travellers. I don't believe it's great, but it is something that we adopted. and we are likely through Reg 18 to adopt the same scheme. I have to say I'm not happy with that, and we'll make my representations. But as for what's in front of us tonight, and that's all we can decide it on, I am happy to move the recommendation as outlined.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Right from the word go on this, the applicant has been as awkward as possible trying not to put this in. When I asked on the original outline submission why they didn't include the traveller provision, I was told it was economically corrosive to the development, which I translated as it'll cost them some money. Putting this footpath in has put a degree of connection and integration with the rest of the Hounsome Fields, but it's a degree out of the 360 degrees that are available. That being said, it does concern me once again that if we refuse this, it will have an effect on our housing land supply because it will stop some of the delivery of the Hounsome Fields site. And that in itself will be a disaster for nearly all the rural communities around Basingstoke, from Dummer to North Waltham, right down through Whitchurch, Overton, and right up to Bramley. So once again, I'm really, really stuck between a rock and a hard place. And no, I'm not seconding it. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a proposal that's been moved but not seconded. Are you seconding, Councillor Hussey? You'd like to speak?
Just thinking that if I lived at that corner of the site and wanted to go to the facilities like the Sainsbury's estate or to the surgery by the co-op, Beggarwood, I wouldn't want to drive through the estate. I would go by road from Trenchard Lane along the A30. I wouldn't want to drive all the way through the estate. So I think in many ways the most convenient route is by the main roads and not through the estate. I don't think there's much opportunity now to include the integration concept within the community. I agree maybe with Councillor Robertson, but I think the opportunity has gone. And with the situation as it is now, I don't see any reasons for refusing this application, so I will second.
Okay, so we have a proposer and a seconder. Councillors Miller and Basham, I'll take your comments, then we'll move to vote. Councillor Basham first.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit, when I read this one earlier, I was pretty taken aback. This is clear manipulation of the criteria. It's clearly gaming the system against Basingstoke and Dean's policies. I asked the information clarification earlier, one, because I couldn't find the phrase integration. Thank you, Patricia, for finding that in CN5, but also because PPTS, which I believe is the national legislation that drives this, on page 199 through to 200, talks in part B about sites being well planned or soft landscaped in such a way as to positively enhance the environment and increase its openness. I don't see any evidence of that. And then more importantly, D, not enclosing a site with so much hard landscaping, high walls or fences, that the impression may be given that the site and its occupants are deliberately isolated from the rest of the community. I think this is a slam dunk. I think it fits those criteria completely, and the PPTS sets out that local planning authorities should attach weight to those matters. I think this is traveller wash. I think it's shocking. I think this this committee needs to send a very strong message to developers that try to play these games. That's my view.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too thank the officers for mentioning the CN5 criteria. And it's my view, and I said before, integration seems to be subjective, and there's various views have been said about that tonight. I do not consider the minor amendments, and I completely agree with Councillor Basham's observations just now, that is anything to do with integration. Integration means it's another part of the overall development. They've deliberately put this down in one corner. And I was particularly concerned about the applicant's representative when asked about why the fencing that's to do with the safety of the occupants. I'm sorry, I raised my eyebrows at that. Safety from who? Whose safety are we talking about? If they're meant to be integrating them, you don't start putting fences up of any kind and hardscaping. So I'm afraid that I find the so-called revision of the original application not acceptable at all. Integration means integration, and I think Councillor Taylor in his written submission put it very well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we've got a live proposal on the table, so we're going to move to vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show. 1, 2, 3, okay. Those against, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that motion falls. We now need an alternative motion, which is either refusal or I don't think we can defer, can we?
Deferral to find out about the road and the pipeline to give the members more information rather than a refusal that will. No.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in terms of the next motion, obviously, as I've advised earlier on in this meeting, the committee has an option to approve, refuse or defer. You'll decide how you motion next. Simply on the point around deferral, the query's been raised about the oil pipeline. You've had a response which appears unsatisfactory in terms of how you've debated it so far. You could, of course, defer to seek further information as to what other options are possible in that sense. Simply put that forward, that's an alternative that you could consider at this stage.
Councillor Basham.
I would like to move a motion that this is refused. I'd like to do so on the basis that when we're considering traveller and gypsy pitches, that policy CN5 should have the highest priority of all of our planning policies. That's what it's for. That's why it exists. And I think it should also be refused on the basis that it doesn't comply with PPTS as I outlined earlier. And I think the applicants need to look up the words impression and integration in the Oxford English Dictionary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Basham. Can I just clarify on that basis, in essence, it would be the same reason for refusal as the previous application in that sense, because it is a further...
Yes.
Okay, it's been moved for refusal. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Miller. Okay, we'll move to vote. Those in favour of refusal, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's carried. Those against? 2. Okay, abstentions? 3. Okay. Right, that's decision is refused. If we could have it read out, please.
Can I just seek a little bit of clarification, Chair, before we do it? The recommendation isn't just straightforward to approve the application, it's to approve it subject to the signing of a legal agreement to secure, because it was a full, not reserved matters, to secure the requirements of the legal agreement attached to the outline planning application. The previous reasons for refusal are on page 187, so would a third reason for refusal to say the lack of a section 106? Oh no, it is. Oh, it's there. Sorry, I saw it there. I'd forgotten. Strike that. 2 reasons. So yes, so the application is refused then, subject to the the reasons set out on page 187, which members don't think have been addressed by the submission of this application, so they would be slightly worded in that context.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, I think that concludes the applications on item 5. We've got item 6, which is modification of section 106 legal agreement. So we'll just pause a little while people leave, and then we'll get that item. Okay, it's just gone 9 o'clock. Hopefully we can get this over and done with before 9:30. Modification section 106 legal agreement attached to an approved planning application on page 237. If we could have the introduction, please.
This is a fact paper. It's requesting the variation of a legal agreement that's been placed on an approved planning permission. The section 106 is seeking to modify the type of delivery of affordable housing. It's not looking to change the number or the quantum or anything else. It's just adding an additional option as a vehicle for delivering affordable housing, which is called the Rent Plus model, and the housing team support the application.
Any questions, anybody for officers? I don't see any. Okay, do I have a mover? Councillor Robinson. Councillor Miller seconding, and we'll move to vote. Those in favour, please show. I think that's unanimous.
And the decision is noted.
Okay. So that concludes our business for this evening. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance.